resolution are equally and even more remarkable. After the battle of Pharsalia, having sent his troops before him into Asia, as he was passing the straits of the Hellespont in a ferry boat, he met with Lucius Cassius, one of the opposite party, with 10 ships of war; and so far from endeavouring to escape, he went alongside his ship, and calling upon him to surrender, Cassius humbly gave him his submission. At Alexandria, in the attack of a bridge, being forced by a sudden sally of the enemy into a boat, and several others hurrying in with him, he leapt into the sea, and saved himself by swimming to the next ship, which lay at the distance of 200 paces, holding up his left hand out of the water for fear of wetting some papers which he held in it, and pulling his general's cloak after him with his teeth, lest it should fall into the hands of the enemy. He never valued a soldier for his moral conduct or his means, but for his courage only, and treated his troops with a mixture of severity and indulgence, for he did not always keep a strict hand over them, but only when the enemy was near. Then, indeed, he was so strict a disciplinarian that he would give no notice of a march or a battle until the moment of action, in order that the troops might hold themselves in readiness for any sudden movement, and he would frequently draw them out of the camp without any necessity for it, especially in rainy weather, and upon holy days. Sometimes, giving them orders not to lose sight of him, he would suddenly depart by day or by night, and lengthen the marches in order to tire them out, as they followed him at a distance. When at any time his troops were dispirited by reports of the great force of the enemy, he rallied their courage, not by denying the truth of what was said, or by diminishing the facts, but on the contrary, by exaggerating every particular. Accordingly, when his troops were in great alarm at the expected arrival of King Juba, he called them together, and said, "I have to inform you that in a very few days the king will be here, with 10 legions, 30,000 horse, 100,000 light-armed foot, and 300 elephants. Let none of you therefore presume to make further inquiry, or indulge in conjectures, but take my word for what I tell you, which I have from undoubted intelligence. Otherwise I shall put them aboard an old crazy vessel, and leave them exposed to the mercy of the winds, to be transported to some other country." He neither noticed all their transgressions, nor punished them according to strict rule; but for deserters and mutineers he made the most diligent inquiry, and their punishment was most severe. Other delinquencies he would connive at. Sometimes, after a great battle ending in victory, he would grant them a relaxation from all kinds of duty, and leave them to revel at pleasure, being used to boast that his soldiers fought nothing the worse for being well oiled. In his speeches he never addressed them by the title of soldiers, but by the kinder phrase of fellow soldiers, and kept them in such splendid order that their arms were ornamented with silver and gold, not merely for parade, but to render the soldiers more resolute to save them in battle, and fearful of losing them. He loved his troops to such a degree that when he heard of the defeat of those under Titurius, he neither cut his hair nor shaved his beard until he had revenged it upon the enemy, by which means he engaged their devoted affection, and raised their valour to the highest pitch. Upon his entering on the civil war, the centurions of every legion offered, each of them, to maintain a horseman at his own expense, and the whole army agreed to serve gratis, without either corn or pay, those amongst them who were rich charging themselves with the maintenance of the poor. No one of them during the whole course of the war deserted to the enemy, and many of those who were made prisoners, though they were offered their lives upon condition of bearing arms against him, refused to accept the terms. They endured want and other hardships, not only when they were besieged themselves, but when they besieged others, to such a degree that Pompey, when blocked up in the neighbourhood of Dyrrachium, upon seeing a sort of bread made of an herb, which they lived upon, said, "I have to do with wild beasts," and ordered it immediately to be taken away, because if his troops should see it, their spirit might be broken by perceiving the endurance and determined resolution of the enemy. With what bravery they fought, one instance affords sufficient proof, which is that after an unsuccessful engagement at Dyrrachium, they called for punishment, insomuch that their general found it more necessary to comfort than to punish them. In other battles in different quarters, they defeated with ease immense armies of the enemy, although they were much inferior to them in number. In short, one cohort of the 6th legion held out a fort against 4 legions belonging to Pompey during several hours, being almost every one of them wounded by the vast number of arrows discharged against them, and of which there were found within the ramparts 130,000. This is no way surprising when we consider the conduct of some individuals amongst them, such as that of Cassius Caesar, a centurion, or Gaius Acilius, a common soldier, not to speak of others. Caesar, after having an eye struck out, being run through the thigh and the shoulder, and having his shield pierced in 120 places, maintained obstinately the guard of the gate of a fort, with the command of which he was entrusted. Acilius, in the sea fight at Marseilles, having seized a ship of the enemy's with his right hand, and that being cut off, in imitation of that memorable instance of resolution in Cynegeirus amongst the Greeks, boarded the enemy's ship, bearing down all before him with the boss of his shield. They never once mutinied during all the 10 years of the Gallic War, but were sometimes refractory in the course of the Civil War. However, they always returned quickly to their duty, and that not through the indulgence, but in submission to the authority of their general. For he never yielded to them when they were insubordinate, but constantly resisted their demands. He disbanded the whole 9th legion with ignominy at Placentia, although Pompey was still in arms, and would not receive them again into his service until they had not only made repeated and humble entreaties, but until the ringleaders in the mutiny were punished. When the soldiers of the 10th legion at Rome demanded their discharge and rewards for their service, with violent threats and no small danger to the city, although the war was then raging in Africa, he did not hesitate, contrary to the advice of his friends, to meet the legion and disband it. But addressing them by the title of Quirites instead of soldiers, he by this single word so thoroughly brought them round and changed their determination, that they immediately cried out they were his soldiers, and followed him to Africa, although he had refused their service. He nevertheless punished the most mutinous among them with the loss of 1/3 of their share in the plunder and the land destined for them. In the service of his clients, while yet a young man, he evinced great zeal and fidelity. He defended the cause of a noble youth, Macintha, against King Hiempsal, so strenuously that in a scuffle which took place upon the occasion he seized by the beard the son of King Juba, and upon Macintha's being declared tributary to Hiempsal, while the friends of the adverse party were violently carrying him off, he immediately rescued him by force, kept him concealed in his house a long